There's something that people find so interesting about scary Sesame Street segments. This show designed for very young kids, throwing in disturbing imagery that sticks with kids for a long time. I'm sure we all have our favorite scary Sesame Street moments, ones that we've remembered since childhood. I was scared very easily as a kid, so I could list off an absolute ton to you right now. But for years now, one particular Sesame Street sketch has fascinated me. A sketch where the Count builds a rocket ship with a rocket scientist named Dr. Reinbrein, a creepy little guy who appeared here with no explanation, and then never showed up again. Reinbrein always made me uncomfortable as a kid, and in today's video, I want to break down this character, his creepiness, his obscurity, and how being super obscure added to the disturbingness of him, and also just revisit his appearance in general and see what's up. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Uptown Funk. I'm your host Ty, as always, and this is Sesame Street Deep Dive, the series where we talk about Sesame Street characters, both well-known and obscure. And today, we're covering easily one of the most obscure characters I've ever talked about here on Uptown Funk. I'm very excited to bring you guys a Halloween deep dive discussing Dr. Reinbrein, a super obscure, spooky Sesame Street character. But in order to understand Dr. Reinbrein, we're going to have to start off by talking a little bit about the Count. After debuting in a sketch in the Season 4 premiere of Sesame Street in 1972, Count Von Count firmly made his way into the show's large recurring Muppet cast, appearing frequently in street scenes, songs, and sketches. A lot of these songs and sketches would take us inside of the Count's castle, with other Muppets often popping in to visit. The comedy of these sketches mainly deriving from the fact that these other characters have to deal with the Count's obsessive counting. There's a very famous sketch where Ernie has to take phone calls for the Count, but the Count keeps stopping him because he wants to count the rings.
One ring!
That's a telephone, I'll answer it.
No, I must count them!
There's another sketch where a mailman comes in and just keeps on bringing more and more mail so that the Count can count the mail. The sixth sketch ever to take place in the Count's castle is the one that we're here to focus on today. The first and only appearance of Dr. Reinbrein, and it follows a somewhat similar format to these other sketches. This sketch first appeared on May 14th, 1979 in episode 1306 of Sesame Street, a part of the show's 10th season. The sketch begins with a shot panning down showing a large metal tube covered in bat logos, which turns out to be a rocket ship. My favorite detail here is the fact that the viewport window on the rocket is actually a stained glass window with a bat in it. That's just really funny. I love how this rocket fits the Count's aesthetic still. Instead of the usual ominous music that starts the Count segments, we hear nothing but mechanical clinking, beeping, and whirring, and we eventually learn that it's coming from the Muppet standing at the base of the rocket, Dr. Reinbrein, an overly enthusiastic mad scientist performed by Frank Oz.
Count, get ready. Oh, it's a beauty, we're ready.
Oz performs a character with a very high-pitched voice. It honestly kind of reminds me of some of the child characters he's performed on Sesame Street over the years. He speaks very frantically, with a tendency to repeat different segments of his sentences, adding to his whole mad scientist persona. He's very frantic, very scatterbrained, appropriate, his name is Reinbrein after all. Honestly, I remember this character having a much scarier voice as a kid, but the voice isn't scary at all. It's a very goofy, silly one. Reinbrein's design uses a standard lavender anything Muppet pattern with a frizzy, messy, sort of purple wig, a lab coat, cross eyes, and a couple of teeth scattered throughout his mouth. Just like his voice, it's pretty silly, but I think we could all agree that there is something a little unsettling with that design as well. The Count asks Reinbrein if he's ready to take off. Reinbrein asks him if he has a wrench, but the Count just tells him to hurry, so Reinbrein forgets about it, telling the Count that he's ready. Only now does the Count address the audience and introduce Reinbrein.
Greetings! For days and days now, my able assistant, Dr. Reinbrein...
Yeah, that's me, Reinbrein, that's me.
Yes, and I have been perfecting the Transylvanian rocket ship.
This line from the Count is the only introduction or backstory the character has ever received. He's the Count's able-bodied assistant here. We've seen many different characters enter the Count's castle over the years, and typically the fact that a different character is in the Count's castle visiting him is where the plot or comedy comes from. But not with Dr. Reinbrein. Reinbrein is just there, and apparently has been for the last several days, working on this rocket ship. Anyway, with the rocket now done, it's time for liftoff. The next big chunk of the sketch is dedicated to the Count counting down from 10 to 1 as Reinbrein excitedly jumps and shakes next to him. Reinbrein gets more and more excited, moving with each of the numbers as they light up, getting closer to the Count and yelling at him to hurry until it's finally time for him to launch the rocket. But when he does...
Blast off!
the rocket doesn't move at all. Reinbrein, of course, sees this as a failure, but the Count claims that it's a success.
But it stayed right here. It stayed here.
Of course it stayed here. That's the beautiful thing about it. Now I get to do the countdown again. Only this time in Transylvania.
After announcing his plan to do the countdown once again, but this time in Transylvania, Reinbrein goes mad, running off right towards the screen. This is the part of the sketch that I remember the most, and no wonder, because this is the part of it that freaked me out as a kid. This guy, this weird, freaky little dude running towards the camera. When I was a kid, I always had a problem with, scary things coming towards me on screen. And while Reinbrein himself isn't particularly scary, he was just weird enough to creep me out when he starts running towards the screen, mouth wide open. He also pops up again later on, and I knew him popping up out of nowhere later definitely would have scared me quite a bit. Honestly, I think the lack of explanation of who this character was also added to me being kind of uncomfortable while watching this sketch. I didn't know Dr. Reinbrein, and there was no way to find out who he was because beyond this sketch, he has no other appearances. So he's just this guy who's here and he goes crazy at the end and runs away, and we never see him again.
Crazy scientist.
And with that, we come to the end for Dr. Reinbrein. 1 2-minute and 14-second segment. This is the entirety of the character's screen time. This jumpy, wacky little mad scientist guy who goes crazy after we learn that the Count's rocket is just a ploy to get him to count down from 10 to 1 over and over and over again. Easily one of the most expensive things the Count has ever done. But he's a Count, so I assume he, has the money to waste on rockets. I mean, clearly he's doing more with them than Jeff Bezos ever did, right? The Dr. Reinbrein sketch appeared in 20 different Sesame Street episodes after its debut in 1979, with its final appearance being in episode 3451 in 1996, part of season 27. In 2001, the sketch was dubbed into Spanish for Plaza Sesamo, appearing in 2 episodes in 2001 and 1 more in 2005. It was also dubbed into German for Sesamstrasse, where it appeared in 2 episodes, the second one being an appropriately space-themed episode, which aired in 2007. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any behind-the-scenes information about Dr. Reinbrein out there. No info on how they came up with the character or the sketch. The only additional piece of information that the Muppet Wiki gives is regarding his name, which they claim is a parody of rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, who worked for the Germans during World War II and was brought over to the US as part of Project Paperclip to do rocket science work over here. He's, of course, a very controversial figure, so it's wild to think that there's potentially a Sesame Street character named after him. But von Braun, Reinbrein, they're both rocket scientists, and von Braun was a very well-known figure throughout the 60s and 70s, so it checks out. Although I should note that he actually passed away 2 years before this sketch aired. Another interesting thing about Reinbrein's Muppet Wiki page is how they spell his name, with E's in Rain and Brain instead of A's. I'm not sure where the Muppet Wiki got this spelling from, but they're typically a very good source of information. So I'm trusting them with the spelling here, and that's what I've been using across this video in the title and in other places. But I will say, everywhere else I look online, his name is just spelt the word rain and the word brain. While I didn't find any additional information on Reinbrein's creation, behind the scenes, or even why the wiki spells his name that way, I did find some references to him on Muppet fan sites across the internet, and honestly, it's always so cool to see fans that remember super obscure characters like this. Someone out there created a Facebook page for Dr. Reinbrein, which is fantastic. I think it's really funny. Unfortunately, it's not active anymore, but it's great to see that some people remember him very fondly, and some people remember him very, very fondly. Favorite Sesame Street character? Here's my list. Number 1 is a 4-way tie between Cookie Monster, Beautiful Day Monster, Dr. Reinbrein, and Fred the Dragon. Then here are the rest of my favorites. Big Bird, Harry Monster, Oscar, Grungetta, Slimy, Grover, Kermit, and Polly Darton. I always loved one particular dress Polly wore. When I was younger, I used to dream about marrying Dr. Reinbrein in it, but I never knew his name was Dr. Reinbrein up until now. I just called him the scientist. This is incredible, and I hope they're very happy together. And that, everyone, is the full history of Dr. Reinbrein, a super obscure Sesame Street character who I've always been so fascinated by because he just pops up and then never shows up again. He's weird, he's kind of unsettling and creepy, and he runs straight towards the camera and goes insane at the end of his only appearance. Anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching this episode of Sesame Street Deep Dive. Please let me know in the comments if you remember this character, if you've seen this sketch before, and what you thought about Dr. Reinbrein. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye now.